In the summer of 1999, as tensions escalated along the line of control between India and Pakistan during the Kargil Conflict, elite military units found themselves operating in some of the world's most unforgiving terrain. The Karakoram mountain range, with its jagged peaks and treacherous glacial valleys, became the stage for a different kind of warfare. At altitudes where the air itself becomes an enemy and temperatures plummet to bone-crushing extremes, soldiers discovered that human adversaries weren't the only threats lurking in the shadows. What began as routine reconnaissance missions in the disputed territories soon evolved into encounters that would challenge everything these hardened professionals thought they knew about combat operations. In valleys where ancient trade routes once connected civilizations, where the ghosts of long-dead caravans still seemed to whisper through the wind, something massive was watching from the heights. The Karakoram Range stretches across the borders of Pakistan, India, and China, home to 4 of the world's 14 peaks exceeding 8,000 meters. These mountains have claimed more lives per expedition than any other range on Earth. The locals have always known better than to venture too far into certain valleys, especially during the brutal winter months when the peaks disappear into perpetual cloud cover, and the only sounds are the crack of shifting ice and the howl of winds that can strip flesh from bone. But in 1999, political boundaries meant nothing to the creatures that had called these mountains home for millennia. As military forces pushed deeper into territories that had remained undisturbed for decades, they began reporting encounters that defied all tactical training and rational explanation. Captain Rajesh Thakur of the Indian Army's elite special forces had spent 15 years in mountain warfare operations. He'd survived avalanches in Siachen, conducted high-altitude reconnaissance missions that most soldiers couldn't even imagine, and earned decorations for valor in some of the most hostile environments on the planet. But nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for what his unit would encounter during Operation Swift Saga. The mission parameters seemed straightforward enough. Intelligence had indicated enemy positions in a remote valley system approximately 40 kilometers north of the main conflict zone. Thakur's 8-man team was tasked with conducting deep reconnaissance, identifying defensive positions, and gathering tactical intelligence for potential future operations. The valley in question appeared on maps as a blank space marked only with elevation contours and the notation "Area Unsurveyed." Local guides had been unusually reluctant to provide information about the region. When pressed for details about terrain features, weather patterns, or historical significance, the village elders would exchange meaningful glances and suggest alternative routes. The few fragments of information they did provide were cryptic warnings about the white shadows that moved through the high passes during certain times of the year. "They speak of things that should not be spoken of," the eldest guide had said through the interpreter. In the old days, caravans would go missing in those valleys, not from avalanches or storms, but from things that walk upright like men but are not men. Things with voices like the mountain wind, but eyes that burn like stars. Thakur had dismissed these warnings as typical mountain folklore, the kind of superstitious stories that developed in isolated communities where extreme conditions and optical illusions could easily be misinterpreted as supernatural phenomena. Every mountain range in the world had similar legends. The Himalayas had their Yeti, the Andes had their Yukumar, and the Rocky Mountains had Sasquatch. They were cultural expressions of humanity's ancient fear of the unknown, nothing more. The insertion went smoothly. Under cover of darkness, the team was helicoptered to a landing zone at 4,200 meters, well below the operational ceiling of their aircraft, but still high enough to require immediate acclimatization protocols. The pilot, a veteran of countless high-altitude missions, seemed unusually eager to complete the drop and return to base. "Weather's changing fast up here," he'd radioed to Thakur as the team prepared to disembark. "We'll be back for pickup in 72 hours. but if conditions deteriorate, you might be looking at extended ground time. The landscape that greeted them was simultaneously beautiful and menacing. Jagged peaks rose like cathedral spires into a sky so clear it seemed almost artificial. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant rumble of glacial movement and the team's own breathing, which came in visible puffs despite their acclimatization training. Each member of Thakur's team was a specialist selected for extreme environment operations. Havildar Singh served as the team's medic and had extensive experience treating altitude-related injuries. Lance Naik Patel was their communications expert, carrying equipment designed to function in the electromagnetic interference common at extreme altitudes. Naik Kumar handled demolitions and had trained extensively in ice and rock climbing techniques. The remaining team members were seasoned mountain fighters, each with multiple deployments in high-altitude conflict zones. They moved with the economical efficiency of men who understood that every calorie expended and every breath taken at altitude was precious. Their equipment was state-of-the-art for 1999, including thermal imaging devices, satellite communication gear, and weapons modified for extreme cold weather operations. The first day proceeded according to plan. The team established a base camp in a sheltered valley approximately 8 kilometers from their target area. Standard security protocols were implemented, with rotating watch schedules and predetermined rally points in case of contact with enemy forces. The terrain proved challenging but manageable, requiring technical climbing skills, but nothing beyond their training parameters. It was during the second night that the first anomaly occurred. Lance Naik Patel was monitoring radio communications when he began receiving transmissions that didn't match any known military frequencies. The signals were consistent but contained no recognizable voice patterns or data protocols. "Sir, I'm picking up something strange on the long-range scanner," Patel reported to Thakur during the 0200 watch change. "It's not enemy communications, and it's definitely not atmospheric interference. The signal strength suggests it's coming from somewhere in the valley system ahead of us." Thakur examined the communications equipment personally. The signals were indeed unusual, characterized by a low-frequency pulse that seemed to follow no recognizable pattern. More concerning was the effect the transmissions were having on their other electronic equipment. GPS devices were showing erratic readings, and the thermal imaging scopes were picking up heat signatures that moved in ways inconsistent with known wildlife patterns. Could be equipment malfunction, Thakur decided. The cold plays hell with the electronics. Keep monitoring, but don't let it distract from the primary mission. But the disturbances weren't limited to electronic equipment. During the third day, as the team moved deeper into the target valley, they began finding tracks in the snow that defied easy explanation. The prints were humanoid in basic shape, but far larger than any human foot, approximately 18 inches in length and showing what appeared to be claw marks rather than normal toe impressions. Naik Kumar, who had extensive tracking experience, examined the prints carefully. "These aren't from any animal I recognize," he reported. "The stride length suggests something walking upright, but the depth of the impressions indicates weight far exceeding human parameters. Whatever made these tracks is moving on 2 legs and weighs at least twice what any of us do." The tracks appeared to follow the same route the team was using to approach their objective area. More disturbing was the apparent age of the prints. Despite recent snowfall, the impressions remained sharp and well-defined, suggesting they had been made within the past 24 hours. Thakur made the tactical decision to continue the mission while implementing enhanced security measures. The team began moving in a more dispersed formation, with point and rear security maintaining greater distances from the main body. Communications protocols were adjusted to include more frequent check-ins, and observation schedules were modified to provide continuous overwatch of their route. On the 4th morning, they encountered their first direct evidence that they were not alone in the valley system. Havildar Singh discovered what appeared to be a campsite approximately 2 kilometers from their current position. The site showed signs of recent occupation, but not by any human agency. Large stones had been arranged in a circular pattern around what might have been a fire pit, though no evidence of burning was present. More concerning were the bones scattered around the perimeter. The remains appeared to be from various animals, but they had been stripped clean and arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate placement rather than random scavenging. "This doesn't look like any military position I've ever seen," Singh reported, "and it's definitely not from local wildlife activity. Something was living here, something that uses tools and has enough intelligence to create organized structures." The team documented the site thoroughly, taking photographs and measurements that would later prove crucial to understanding what they had encountered. But it was the discovery of additional tracks leading away from the campsite that truly alarmed them. The prints were fresh, less than 12 hours old, and they led directly toward the team's planned route of advance. Whatever had created the campsite was now moving parallel to their mission path, maintaining a distance that suggested either coincidence or deliberate shadowing behavior. Given the remote nature of the terrain and the specific route requirements of their mission, coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely. That evening, as the team established their fourth night position, they began experiencing phenomena that challenged their understanding of mountain warfare entirely. The temperature, which had been consistent with seasonal norms, began fluctuating wildly. Their thermometers registered drops of 15 degrees Celsius within minutes, followed by equally rapid warming periods that left condensation forming on their equipment. More disturbing were the sounds that began echoing through the valley after darkness fell. Deep, resonant calls that seemed to originate from multiple directions simultaneously. The vocalizations didn't match any known animal species, combining elements of human speech with something far more primal and alien. "Those aren't mountain cats," Nightkumar observed during his watch shift. "And they're definitely not coming from enemy positions. The acoustics are all wrong for human vocalization. Whatever's making those sounds has lung capacity far exceeding normal human parameters." The calls continued throughout the night, sometimes seeming to come from directly overhead, other times echoing from the valley walls in ways that made directional identification impossible. The team's equipment registered the sounds, but couldn't provide reliable bearing information, as if the vocalizations were being reflected and distorted by the terrain itself. By the fifth day, it had become clear that the team was being systematically observed and possibly hunted by something that understood their tactical procedures better than any conventional enemy should have been able to. Their planned routes were consistently intersected by fresh tracks. Their temporary positions were discovered within hours of establishment, and their electronic communications were subject to interference that followed no recognizable pattern. Captain Thacker faced a decision that would define the remainder of their mission: continue advancing toward their original objective, despite clear evidence of an unknown presence in the area, or abort the reconnaissance and extract with the intelligence they had already gathered. The tactical situation was unprecedented, but the strategic importance of their mission parameters couldn't be ignored. The choice was made for them during the early hours of the sixth day, when Lance Naik Patel disappeared from his guard position without a trace. The discovery of Patel's disappearance sent shockwaves through the remaining team members. His guard position showed no signs of struggle, no indication of direction of movement, and most disturbing of all, no footprints leading away from his post. The snow around his position remained undisturbed, except for his own tracks approaching the area, as if he had simply vanished into the mountain air itself. Havildar Singh conducted an immediate perimeter search while the remaining team members secured their equipment and prepared for potential contact. Standard operating procedures called for expanding search patterns and establishing communication with base command, but their radio equipment had been experiencing increasing interference since the previous evening. "Sir, there's something you need to see," Singh reported from approximately 50 meters up the valley slope. His voice carried a tension that Thakur had never heard from the veteran medic, even during their most dangerous operations. What Singh had discovered defied every principle of mountain warfare and enemy contact that Thakur had learned during his 15 years of service. Patel's equipment lay scattered across a section of granite outcropping, but not in the pattern typical of combat engagement or accidental fall. His weapon, communications gear, and personal items were arranged in a deliberate configuration, almost ceremonial in nature. The rifle had been placed vertically against a boulder, its barrel pointing toward the highest peak visible in the valley. Around it, Patel's other gear formed concentric circles, with his radio positioned at the exact center and his ammunition distributed at precise intervals around the perimeter. Most unsettling was the discovery of Patel's boots, placed side by side facing away from the team's position, as if he had walked out of them and continued barefoot into the wilderness. "This isn't enemy action," Knight Kumar observed, examining the arrangement with the analytical mind of a demolitions expert, accustomed to recognizing patterns and intentional placement. No hostile force would take time to create something like this. It's too exposed, too time-consuming, and serves no tactical purpose. But Thakur noticed details that his subordinates had missed. The rocks surrounding the equipment arrangement showed scratch marks, deep gouges in the granite that would have required tremendous force to create. The patterns weren't random, forming symbols that seemed almost familiar, like half-remembered images from ancient texts or archaeological photographs. More concerning was the discovery of additional tracks leading away from the site. These weren't the large humanoid prints they had been following for days, but something entirely different. The impressions showed what appeared to be human feet, but elongated and narrow, with toe marks that extended far beyond normal human proportions. The stride length indicated someone of Patel's approximate height, but the depth and spacing suggested movement patterns that defied human biomechanics. "He walked away from here," Singh reported after careful examination of the ground. "But sir, these tracks, they don't look right. The gait pattern is wrong for human locomotion, and the foot positioning suggests joint flexibility that shouldn't be possible." The trail of elongated footprints led directly toward a section of the valley that appeared on their maps as impassable terrain. Vertical rock faces rose for hundreds of meters, broken only by narrow ledges and ice-covered crevices that would challenge even the most experienced mountaineers. Yet the tracks continued in that direction without deviation, as if the person making them possessed climbing abilities far beyond normal human capacity. Thakur made the decision to follow the trail despite the obvious dangers. Standard military protocol would have called for immediate extraction and reinforcement, but abandoning a team member without concrete evidence of his fate violated every principle of unit cohesion that had kept them alive during countless previous operations. The pursuit led them into terrain that pushed their technical climbing skills to the limit. The tracks continued up near vertical rock faces, across ice bridges that barely supported their weight, and through crevices so narrow that they had to remove their equipment packs to squeeze through. Throughout the climb, the elongated footprints remained visible, leading them deeper into areas of the mountain range that appeared untouched by human presence for centuries. It was during this pursuit that they encountered their first clear evidence of the intelligence behind the phenomena they had been experiencing. Approximately 3 hours into the technical climb, they discovered a series of rope anchors installed in the rock face. The hardware wasn't military standard, showing no manufacturer markings or recognizable design elements, but the installation demonstrated sophisticated understanding of mountain climbing techniques and load-bearing requirements. "These aren't improvised," Kumar reported after examining the anchor points. "Someone with extensive technical knowledge placed these specifically for this route. The spacing and angles show professional-level climbing expertise, but the materials are unlike anything I've seen before." The rope itself appeared to be organic fiber, possibly plant-based, but with tensile strength that exceeded modern synthetic climbing ropes. When tested under load, the material showed no signs of stretching or degradation despite obvious exposure to extreme weather conditions. Following the established route, the team found themselves traversing ledges and climbing pitches that would have been impossible without the mysteriously placed anchors. The path led them steadily upward, following a logical progression through the mountain's most challenging terrain, as if someone had spent considerable time mapping the optimal route through otherwise impassable geography. As they climbed higher, the environmental conditions became increasingly unusual. The temperature began fluctuating in patterns that defied meteorological explanation, dropping to dangerous levels for brief periods before returning to more manageable ranges. Their altitude readings showed inconsistencies that suggested either equipment malfunction or atmospheric conditions unlike anything in their previous mountain warfare experience. More disturbing were the acoustic phenomena that intensified as they gained elevation. The deep, resonant calls they had heard during previous nights now seemed to come from directly above their climbing route. The vocalizations demonstrated characteristics that no known animal species could produce, combining subsonic frequencies that they felt as much as heard with harmonic patterns that suggested intentional communication. "Sir, those aren't random animal sounds," Singh observed during a rest stop on a narrow ledge. "There's structure to the vocalizations, almost like language patterns, and they're responding to our movement. Every time we change position, the calls adjust direction and intensity." The team's electronic equipment continued to malfunction in ways that seemed to correlate with the mysterious vocalizations. Their GPS devices showed position readings that placed them in impossible locations. Their altitude meters registered fluctuations that would have indicated rapid vertical movement, and their communications gear picked up signals that contained no recognizable data patterns. After 6 hours of technical climbing, they reached a plateau that offered their first clear view of the surrounding terrain since beginning the pursuit. What they saw challenged their understanding of the geography they thought they knew. The valley system spread below them in configurations that didn't match their topographical maps, with features that appeared and disappeared depending on viewing angle and lighting conditions. But it was the discovery on the plateau itself that truly shattered their preconceptions about what they were facing. In the center of the flat area, sheltered by a circle of standing stones that showed obvious signs of human construction, they found evidence of Lance Naik Patel's continued presence in the area. His uniform lay folded in a neat pile, each item arranged with military precision. His identification tags hung from a stone cairn that hadn't been present when they began their ascent. But most significantly, they found a message scratched into a flat section of rock, written in Patel's characteristic handwriting, but containing information that he shouldn't have possessed. The message provided detailed intelligence about enemy positions throughout the valley system, including defensive installations and troop movements that their reconnaissance mission had been designed to discover. The information was accurate and current, demonstrating knowledge of military activities that would have required extensive observation from multiple vantage points over several days. But the message also contained warnings about the presence of guardian entities that protected certain areas of the mountain range from human intrusion. According to Patel's scratched notes, these beings possessed intelligence and capabilities that far exceeded human limitations, but operated according to territorial rules that could be negotiated if approached with proper respect and understanding. "They are not hostile unless threatened," the message read in Patel's precise script. "Ancient protectors of the high places. They have watched armies come and go for centuries. They offer knowledge to those who prove worthy, but demand complete commitment from those who would learn their secrets." The implications were staggering. If the message was genuine, Patel had not been captured or killed, but had somehow made contact with entities that possessed detailed knowledge of current military operations, while maintaining hidden presence in areas supposedly under complete surveillance by both sides of the conflict. As the team studied the message and examined the evidence of Patel's voluntary departure from conventional military service, they became aware that they were no longer alone on the plateau. The acoustic phenomena that had been following them throughout their climb were now originating from positions just beyond their visual range, but close enough to suggest imminent contact. The temperature dropped suddenly and dramatically, causing their breath to become visible and ice crystals to form on their equipment within seconds. The sound of approaching footsteps became audible, but with characteristics that suggested weight and stride length far exceeding human parameters. Captain Thakur faced a decision that would define not only the remainder of their mission, but potentially the rest of their lives. They could attempt to withdraw from the plateau and extract with the intelligence they had gathered, or they could remain and make contact with whatever entities had been observing them throughout their operations. The choice was made for them when massive figures began emerging from concealment positions around the perimeter of the stone circle, moving with coordinated precision that demonstrated both intelligence and tactical awareness that rivaled their own special forces training. The figures that emerged from the concealment positions around the plateau defied every principle of camouflage and stealth that Captain Thakur had learned during his extensive military training. They moved with fluid coordination that suggested a level of tactical awareness reserved for the most elite special forces units, yet their physical characteristics placed them far outside the parameters of human capability. Standing between 9 and 11 feet in height, the entities possessed the basic bipedal structure of humans, but built on a scale that belonged to an entirely different evolutionary branch. Their bodies were covered in thick white fur that seemed to shift and change density depending on lighting conditions, providing natural camouflage that explained how they had remained undetected despite their enormous size. Most striking were their eyes, which reflected available light with an intensity that created the impression of internal illumination. The lead figure approached with deliberate, measured steps that demonstrated awareness of the team's tactical positioning while avoiding any movements that could be interpreted as aggressive. When it spoke, the voice carried the deep, resonant qualities they had been hearing throughout their mission, but now formed recognizable words in accented but clearly understandable Hindi. "You have climbed far from your designated paths, mountain warriors," the entity said, its massive chest producing sounds that seemed to emanate from multiple locations simultaneously. "Your companion chose wisdom over warfare. The question remains whether you possess similar judgment." Havildar Singh raised his weapon instinctively, but Thakur placed a restraining hand on his subordinate's arm. The tactical situation was unprecedented, but the entity's posture and vocal patterns suggested communication rather than confrontation. More significantly, the creature's knowledge of their language and apparent familiarity with military terminology indicated intelligence that far exceeded anything they had been trained to expect in hostile contact scenarios. "Where is Lance Naik Patel?" Thakur asked, maintaining his professional composure while assessing the tactical environment. The remaining entities had positioned themselves at strategic intervals around the plateau, creating a perimeter that effectively controlled all avenues of approach and withdrawal without appearing overtly threatening. "Your brother walks the high paths now," the lead figure replied, gesturing toward peaks that rose beyond the immediate valley system. "He has accepted instruction in the ancient ways of mountain warfare, learning tactics that your armies have forgotten for centuries. He remains bound by oath to your service, but serves now in capacity that transcends the limitations of conventional military structure." The implications were staggering. If the entity's statements were accurate, Patel had not been captured or coerced, but had voluntarily accepted some form of advanced training from beings whose existence challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of high-altitude warfare. The tactical advantages of such knowledge would be immeasurable, but the cost, in terms of traditional military protocol, was equally significant. Knight Kumar stepped forward, his demolitions expertise making him naturally analytical about structural problems and strategic solutions. What kind of instruction? What capabilities are you offering that exceed our current training parameters? The entity's expression, insofar as its non-human features could be read, seemed to convey something approaching approval. Your people fight wars in the valleys, claiming territories that change hands with each political season. We've observed these conflicts for generations, watching armies struggle against terrain that we have mastered for millennia. Your weapons are impressive, but they cannot defeat avalanches. Your tactics are sophisticated, but they cannot overcome altitude sickness. Your courage is admirable, but it cannot compensate for ignorance of mountain spirit. As if to demonstrate their point, the entity gestured toward the surrounding peaks, and the acoustic phenomena that had been following the team throughout their mission intensified dramatically. The sounds now clearly originated from multiple positions across the entire valley system, creating a communication network that spanned dozens of kilometers of mountainous terrain. We maintain observation posts on every significant peak in this range, the entity continued. We monitor weather patterns, avalanche conditions, and troop movements through methods your reconnaissance satellites cannot match. We move through terrain that your maps classify as impassable, and we survive in conditions that would kill your most experienced mountain fighters within hours. Singh examined the entity with the clinical interest of a medical professional trying to understand unprecedented physiological capabilities. The creature's respiratory system showed no signs of altitude-related stress despite their current elevation of over 5,000 meters. Its muscular development suggested strength levels that would allow it to carry equipment loads impossible for human soldiers, while its apparent comfort in sub-zero temperatures indicated adaptation to environmental conditions that required extensive technological support for conventional forces. "What do you want from us?" Thakur asked, recognizing that traditional military protocols provided no framework for the current situation. His training emphasized tactical flexibility and adaptive decision-making, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for negotiations with entities that possessed military capabilities exceeding his own, while maintaining apparent neutrality in ongoing conflicts. "We offer exchange of knowledge," the entity replied. "Your armies bring new technologies, new weapons, new tactical innovations that demonstrate human ingenuity. In return, we provide understanding of mountain warfare that your military academies cannot teach. Survival techniques, movement methods, and environmental awareness that transforms soldiers into true mountain warriors." The proposal carried implications that extended far beyond their immediate mission parameters. Access to the kind of high-altitude warfare expertise the entities claimed to possess would revolutionize military operations throughout the world's major mountain ranges. But accepting such knowledge would require acknowledging the existence of beings whose presence challenged fundamental assumptions about human dominance in terrestrial environments. "Your companion understood the value of this exchange," the entity continued, apparently reading the hesitation in their tactical positioning. "He has learned to move across ice fields that would challenge your most advanced equipment, to predict weather changes hours before your meteorological instruments detect them, and to survive in conditions that your survival manuals classify as unsurvivable." Kumar's analytical mind immediately grasped the strategic implications. If this knowledge exists, why hasn't it been shared before? Why maintain secrecy when it could save lives and improve military effectiveness? The entity's response carried undertones of ancient frustration and carefully maintained patience. "Your species approaches mountains as enemies to be conquered, rather than environments to be understood. Your armies bring destruction to places that have remained pristine for centuries, and your conflicts pollute areas that serve as sanctuaries for forms of life your scientists have never catalogued." As the entity spoke, additional figures began emerging from concealment positions throughout the valley system below their current location. The scope of their observation network became apparent as dozens of massive forms materialized from terrain features that had appeared empty during the team's reconnaissance. The tactical situation was not merely unprecedented, but completely outside any scenario their military training had contemplated. "We have watched human conflicts in these mountains for generations," the lead entity continued. "Armies come and go, borders shift according to political decisions made in distant capitals, but the mountains themselves remain constant. We have learned that individual soldiers, when separated from the machinery of warfare, often possess wisdom that their commanding officers lack." Singh noticed that their electronic equipment had stabilized during the conversation, with GPS readings showing accurate positions and communication gear functioning normally for the first time in days. The interference they had experienced appeared to be deliberately generated, possibly as a form of non-lethal defensive measure designed to discourage human intrusion into sensitive areas. "Your Lance Nike demonstrated this wisdom," the entity observed. "When offered the choice between continuing conventional military operations and learning methods that would make him more effective in mountain warfare, he chose knowledge over blind obedience to standard operating procedures." Thakur realized that the decision facing his team transcended simple tactical considerations. They could attempt to extract with the intelligence they had gathered, reporting the encounter through normal military channels and triggering investigations that would likely result in massive military operations designed to capture or eliminate the entities. Alternatively, they could accept the offered exchange, gaining access to knowledge that could revolutionize mountain warfare while potentially compromising their standing within conventional military hierarchy. The entity seemed to recognize the complexity of their position. "We do not require immediate decision. Your mission parameters included gathering intelligence about enemy positions and defensive capabilities. We can provide this information with accuracy that exceeds your reconnaissance objectives, demonstrating the value of cooperation over confrontation." As if summoned by the entity's words, additional figures approached carrying what appeared to be detailed topographical information carved into flat sections of stone. The maps showed the entire valley system with precision that surpassed their military cartography, including defensive positions, supply routes, and personnel concentrations that would have required weeks of dangerous surveillance to obtain through conventional methods. "This intelligence represents current enemy dispositions as of this morning," the entity explained. "Positions shift frequently in response to weather conditions and supply considerations, but we maintain continuous observation that allows real-time tactical assessment." Kumar examined the stone maps with professional interest, noting details that confirmed the accuracy of the information through correlation with intelligence they had already gathered during their reconnaissance mission. The enemy positions were precisely located, with defensive capabilities and personnel strengths indicated through symbolic systems that were surprisingly intuitive despite their obvious non-human origin. "How do we know this information is reliable?" Singh asked, applying medical skepticism to intelligence assessment. "What verification methods can you provide?" The entity's response demonstrated understanding of military verification protocols that suggested extensive observation of human military operations. "Your communication equipment is now functioning normally. Contact your base command and request confirmation of enemy positions in grid squares 77 Alpha through 82 Bravo. Compare their intelligence with the information we have provided." The suggestion was tactically sound, but carried significant implications. Using their restored communications to verify the entity's intelligence would necessarily involve reporting their current situation to higher command, triggering responses that could complicate or terminate any potential cooperation arrangements. Thakur made the decision to test the entity's credibility while maintaining operational security. He instructed Singh to establish communication with their base command and request routine intelligence updates for their operational area, without revealing the source of their interest in specific grid coordinates. The response confirmed the accuracy of the stone maps with precision that eliminated any possibility of coincidence. Enemy positions, strength assessments, and defensive capabilities matched the entity's information exactly, demonstrating intelligence-gathering capabilities that exceeded conventional military reconnaissance by several orders of magnitude. "Your surveillance methods are impressive," Thakur acknowledged, recognizing that tactical honesty was essential for productive negotiations. "What assurance can you provide that this cooperation wouldn't compromise our military obligations?" The entity's response revealed understanding of military hierarchy and command structure that suggested decades of observation of human military operations. "We seek knowledge exchange, not recruitment into your conflicts. Your companion retains his loyalty to your forces while gaining capabilities that make him more effective in mountain operations. He serves the same objectives through enhanced methods." The offer represented an unprecedented opportunity for tactical advancement, but accepting it would require decisions that exceeded Thakur's command authority. The knowledge the entities possessed could revolutionize military operations throughout the world's major mountain ranges, but accessing it would require acknowledgement of beings whose existence challenged fundamental assumptions about human dominance in terrestrial environments. As the team considered their options, the temperature began dropping rapidly, and the acoustic phenomena that had characterized their entire mission intensified into patterns that clearly indicated approaching weather changes. The entity's apparent ability to predict and possibly influence environmental conditions added another dimension to their demonstrated capabilities. "Storm approaches," the lead entity announced, confirming what their own meteorological equipment was beginning to register. "Your extraction window will close within 6 hours. Decision must be made regarding continuation of conventional mission parameters or acceptance of enhanced training opportunities." The choice would define not only the remainder of their current operation, but potentially the future direction of high-altitude warfare itself. In the growing darkness of the approaching storm, with massive figures maintaining respectful but clearly controlling positions around their location, Captain Thakur faced a decision that would echo through military history. The storm struck with a ferocity that transformed the plateau into a maelstrom of ice and wind. Within minutes, visibility dropped to mere meters, and the temperature plummeted to levels that threatened hypothermia despite their cold weather gear. Yet the entities showed no signs of distress, moving through the blizzard with the same fluid coordination they had demonstrated in clear conditions. "Your equipment is insufficient for these conditions," the lead entity observed, its voice somehow carrying clearly despite the howling wind. "Without shelter, your team will not survive until dawn." As if to demonstrate their mastery over the mountain environment, several of the creatures began constructing what appeared to be a sophisticated shelter, using materials that seemed to materialize from the storm itself. Ice blocks were shaped and fitted with precision that would have challenged experienced engineers, while the structure's design incorporated aerodynamic principles that deflected the worst of the wind. Within an hour, the team found themselves in a shelter that maintained comfortable temperatures despite the raging blizzard outside. The construction methods defied conventional understanding of material science, yet the results were undeniably effective. More importantly, the shelter included communication equipment that allowed clear contact with their base command despite the severe weather conditions. "This is impossible," Singh whispered to Thakur as they observed their hosts working with ice as if it were malleable clay. "The thermal properties alone should make this structure unstable, but it's actually warmer in here than our base camp." The lead entity approached their position with what appeared to be additional intelligence materials. "Your extraction helicopter cannot operate in these conditions," it stated matter-of-factly. "Weather patterns indicate storm duration of 36 hours minimum. Your base command will assume mission compromise and initiate search protocols that will endanger additional personnel. Kumar examined the weather data the entity provided, comparing it against their own meteorological equipment. The correlation was perfect, but the level of detail suggested forecasting capabilities that exceeded military weather services by significant margins. More concerning was the accuracy of the entity's assessment regarding their extraction situation. "We can provide safe passage to alternative extraction coordinates," the entity continued. "Routes through terrain your maps classify as impassable, but which we traverse regularly. Your Lance Nike has already learned these methods and could guide additional teams through similar passages." The offer represented salvation from an increasingly desperate tactical situation, but accepting it would require trust in beings whose capabilities they barely comprehended. Traditional military doctrine emphasized self-reliance and mistrust of unknown entities, yet their current circumstances made conventional solutions impossible. Thakur realized that their situation had evolved beyond simple mission parameters. They were witnessing capabilities that could revolutionize not just mountain warfare, but humanity's entire relationship with extreme environments. The knowledge these entities possessed represented advances in survival technology, environmental adaptation, and terrain navigation that exceeded military research by decades. "If we accept your assistance," Thakur asked carefully, "what obligations does that create? What do you expect in return?" The entity's response revealed understanding of military honor codes and reciprocal obligation systems that suggested deep familiarity with human military culture. Knowledge shared creates bonds of mutual respect. Those who learn our methods become guardians of the high places, protectors of environments that your civilization threatens through ignorance rather than malice. As the storm continued to rage outside their impossible shelter, the team faced a choice that transcended individual survival. They could maintain conventional military protocols and likely perish in the blizzard, or they could accept assistance that would fundamentally alter their understanding of what was possible in extreme environments. Singh made the decision that would define their fate. "Captain, our primary obligation is to complete the mission and return with intelligence. These beings have provided information that exceeds our collection objectives while demonstrating capabilities that could benefit our entire military structure. I recommend we accept their assistance and establish formal contact protocols." Kumar nodded agreement. The tactical advantages are undeniable. If Lance Naik Patel has truly learned their methods without compromising his military obligations, then we have an opportunity to advance our mountain warfare capabilities by generations. Captain Thakur looked around at the shelter that should not have been possible, at the beings who moved through deadly storms as easily as walking across parade grounds, and at the stone maps that contained intelligence more accurate than satellites could provide. The decision was clear, even if its implications would challenge military doctrine for decades to come. "We accept your assistance," he announced formally. "In exchange for safe extraction and continued intelligence cooperation, we offer to serve as liaison between your people and ours, facilitating knowledge exchange that benefits both our species' understanding of mountain warfare." The lead entity's expression conveyed what might have been satisfaction. "Lance Naik Patel chose wisely when he recommended you as suitable candidates for extended cooperation. Your training begins immediately." What followed was an education in mountain warfare that transformed their understanding of what human beings could achieve in extreme environments. Over the following days, they learned movement techniques that allowed traversal of terrain they had previously considered impossible, survival methods that made them independent of technological support systems, and environmental awareness that turned the mountains from adversaries into allies. When they finally returned to base command 6 days later, they carried intelligence that exceeded their mission parameters by orders of magnitude, along with capabilities that would revolutionize high-altitude military operations. But they also carried knowledge of beings whose existence would challenge fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in the natural world. The official reports classified their encounter as successful intelligence gathering with local assets, a description that satisfied command requirements while protecting the entity's secrecy. But among elite mountain warfare units, stories began circulating about soldiers who had learned to move through impossible terrain, who could predict weather changes with supernatural accuracy, and who spoke of white shadows that watched over the high places. Lance Naik Patel returned to active duty 3 months later, officially listed as recovered from altitude sickness after extended medical treatment. His capabilities in mountain operations had advanced to levels that seemed to transcend human limitation, making him invaluable for operations in extreme terrain while raising questions that could never be officially answered. The phantom Yeti of the Karakoram became more than legend. They became guardians of ancient knowledge, protectors of mountain wisdom that bridged the gap between human ambition and natural mastery. In the highest places of the world, where political boundaries mean nothing and survival depends on understanding forces greater than military technology, some soldiers learned that the most dangerous enemies could become the most valuable allies. Thank you for joining Dr. Whisper of War for this exploration of encounters that transcend conventional military understanding. In the remote peaks where nations meet and ancient powers still hold domain, we discover that some missions succeed not through conquest, but through recognition of our place within systems far older and more sophisticated than human civilization. The mountains remember every army that has passed through their domain, and occasionally they choose to share their secrets with those wise enough to listen. Until next time, remember that in the highest places of our world, the line between legend and reality becomes as thin as the air itself.